a kind of strange mythical creature that sits in the shade all the time. My name's Emma. I'm the religious studies teacher at WQE. Currently, it's just me that teaches the course. So if you do decide that it's what you want to study next year, you're guaranteed to get me, or pretty much guaranteed to get me, unless something unforeseen happens. We do talk about the subject as philosophy, religion, and ethics, just simply because, as you can see at the bottom of those slides there, the course is split into 3 component parts. So I think that calling it religious studies is what the exam boards do for ease and to sort of uniform all of the different courses across all of the different boards. But certainly for our board, which is EDUCAS, it's important to know that the qualification is split into 3 parts, and each of those parts is worth the same amount. So they're all worth sort of 33.3% of your grade. So you will study philosophy, primarily philosophy of religion, and we'll talk about what that involves in a minute. You will study ethics, and again, we'll talk about what that is in a minute. And our chosen religion that we study at WQE is Buddhism. So that's just a brief kind of message there about the exam board and what we do. And here's a little bit more. So as I mentioned, the course that we choose at WQE, the exam board, is EDUCAS. The reason why we've chosen EDUCAS, I think, firstly, is because the qualification is split into those 3 very clear, distinct parts. And also that the exam questions are probably the most straightforward of all of the questions from all of the different exam boards. There are only 2 types of questions that you can get asked, whereas with some of the other A-level courses, there are a lot of other different types of questions that are worth a different number of marks, and where you've got to do slightly more sort of not complicated stuff, but your answers have got to be much more particular, and it's harder to kind of see exactly what the examiners want you to do. I've been teaching now for 12 years, and I've taught a variety of different exam boards, and I've got to be honest, I think that EDUCAS is the nicest to teach by quite some way, and I think it's also the nicest to study. It's the most enjoyable to study. So there, of course, is only exams now. There hasn't been A-level coursework for the whole time that I've been teaching. So in all of those 12 years, we've never had coursework in religious studies, either at the A-level or at the GCSE, which I've also taught for a long time as well. So you will do 3 exams at the end of year 2. Now, that doesn't make this subject particularly special. It makes it, in fact, much more like your other humanities or sort of arts-based courses like history or politics or sociology or whatever it is. There's no coursework, it's just exams. And of course, you can see that the 3 exams are going to reflect the 3 component parts as well. So you'll have 1 exam on Buddhism, you'll have 1 exam on the philosophy of religion, and you'll have 1 exam on ethics. And again, I'm not trying to sell the exam board, but the thing that I enjoy the most about this is that those 3 exams don't, mix into each other. So once you've done your Buddhism exam, which will be your first exam, that's done. Once you've done your philosophy of religion exam, that's done. And ethics, which is always the last one, obviously that's done. So there's no kind of need for you to revise and go into the exam with more than 1 component's information in your mind at a time. And I think that compared to other exam boards like AQA, it's much more straightforward. AQA examine you on the philosophy of religion and ethics at the same time. So in terms of what you've got to revise and go into the exam with, it's a lot more, it's a much tougher thing to do, and I don't really understand why they do it that way, but hey. All of your papers are marked out of 100. And there are two sets of questions, as I've said, only two. One question is worth 20 marks and one question is worth 30 marks. So you've got a 60-40% split in terms of your assessment objectives. Your 20-mark questions are explain questions, where you might be asked to explain the particulars of a philosophical theory, or you might be asked to explain a particular argument that we've studied. And your 30-mark questions are your evaluation questions, where you are asked to look at the strengths, the weaknesses, and think about how true a statement might be. So if you've done the GCSE in religious studies, you'll be familiar with those types of questions, which are set up as a statement in inverted commas, and then you've got to evaluate how true you think the statement is. I should say though, if you haven't done the GCSE in religious studies for whatever reason, it really doesn't matter. The A-level is so different to the GCSE in terms of the content, in terms of how it's taught, in terms of what's expected. So if for whatever reason you didn't choose it or you weren't able to, but you really feel like it's what you want to do now, that's absolutely fine. Every year we have students that haven't done religious studies since year 9, and you know, it doesn't make a great deal of difference as long as you're willing to work hard. So I've just gone through those there, the 2 assessment objectives. And as you can see here again, the 3 components of study that make up your 3 exams: philosophy of religion, ethics, and the study of Buddhism. The study of Buddhism, I've just started with the current year 1s, that obviously will be year 2 by the time you join us. And it was a really fun little introduction lesson into sort of the world of the Buddha, where the Buddha was born, how he was raised, and yeah, his kind of early life story. It's a fantastic sort of a system of belief. It's quite complex, but it's also really personally rewarding as well. And I think that's additionally a reason why we've chosen to offer it as part of the course. So a little bit more about what the specific components include, because you might be thinking, well, you keep saying philosophy of religion, Emma, and I don't really know what you mean. Well, really, philosophy of religion is the study of not religions as such, but the central beliefs and principles within religions. And philosophy is, of course, asking questions about things. It's seeking to find out how true things are and what the limits what the extent and the limits of our knowledge can be. So when it comes to religion, of course, the central question is, to what extent can we know God? To what extent can we say that there is a God? And our first sort of section of work in year 1 will be around the arguments for God's existence. We will look at the classic arguments. They're known as the classical arguments from people like Thomas Aquinas and William Paley and St. Anselm, who spent their lives constructing very, very clever and detailed arguments seeking to prove the existence of God. We'll also look at challenges to the existence of God as well. So the existence of evil and suffering in the world. How can there be an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing God when such grave and horrific evil happens in the world? It's all well and good to say, well, it's free will, isn't it? But why would God not intervene in things that are not caused by humans? For example, a global pandemic. Why do so many hundreds of thousands of people die in natural disasters or incurable illness? there might well be explanations for this that you have in your mind already, perhaps from your particular faith perspective or just from your own insight. But our job, of course, will be to pull those arguments apart, you know, to pull that thinking apart and see how valid it is. We, of course, are going to become familiar with the works of some of the greatest thinkers in human history. Now, I've said no big deal. It's incredible, the number of philosophers, the number of incredible thinkers that we have to look at. There's no requirement on you to read massive chunks of ancient philosophical texts. So, you know, don't worry about that if that's something that makes you feel anxious. But I'm obviously going to encourage it because they are absolutely wonderful. They are challenging, but I think there's something really rewarding in setting yourself something that you find difficult. There's a great amount of pleasure that we can derive from things that we find hard if we stick at them. So people like Plato, people like Aristotle, Socrates, Thomas Aquinas, David Hume, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Sartre, an incredible array of philosophers from the ancient world right up to the 20th and 21st century. My only gripe is that there aren't many women included in the course, but as far as I can, I will try and squeeze in some female philosophers, even if they're not strictly speaking on the spec. Philosophy is all about, as I say, asking and seeking answers to kind of big questions. So if this sort of seems like the kind of thing that you would want to discuss and debate, this subject is probably something you would enjoy. As I mentioned before, how can belief in God make sense in a world with such horrendous evil? Is belief in God actually a form of mild mental illness that affects vulnerable people? That is the perspective of the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. So if any of you are thinking that you're going to combine religious studies with psychology, there will be a crossover unit where we look at the psychology of religious belief. What exactly is going on in the mind when people say they believe in God? Freud was very critical, as you can probably tell, of religion and argued that religion was in fact a form of mental illness. Those people that claimed to believe in God were actually mentally ill. Very controversial, of course, right? So we'll have a look at what his arguments are there and how he defends them, and of course, how reasonable we think they are. When we move on to look at ethics, we are asking a really central question that I think actually a lot of us just want to know. How can I know what is good and what living a good life consists in? How do we know whether what we have done is morally good? How are we making that judgment? And how do I know when I look at myself in the mirror that I am a good person? What is the criteria for that? Am I looking at the consequences of my action? Am I thinking about whether what I do makes people happy? Or is morality something much more fixed, like obeying a set of laws, perhaps revealed to us through the prophets, having come from the ultimate source of goodness, which would be God? It really is a fantastic aspect of I think, just the course, but also such an important question for us to consider. And we also talk about free will. How do you know that you are free? We assume, I think, that we are. We assume that the actions that we perform on a daily basis are freely chosen. They certainly feel freely chosen. When I went to the kitchen before and I decided to make a cup of tea, rather than play with my fancy new coffee machine that I'm not entirely sure how to work yet, that felt like a free choice. I mean, it's not a moral decision. It's not like a right or wrong situation, but it might well be that my action wasn't free. It might well be that my action was in some way predetermined. And if the same is true of our moral action, that when I decided to let somebody go in front of me at the supermarket yesterday because they had less things to buy than me, it might well be that that action wasn't mine to choose at all. And if that's the case, I can't really take credit for it. I can't really consider myself to be a good person because I didn't really make that decision. And I think one of the things that is underappreciated is the notion of predestination in the major world religions, that all major world religions, well, certainly those that believe in an all-powerful God, have got this dimension of predestination within them. And how does that really fit alongside free will? It doesn't seem as if the two are compatible. We are going to look at a number of different ethical arguments. We're going to look at utilitarianism. We're going to look at Aquinas's natural law. We're going to look at situation ethics. We're going to look at Aristotle's virtue ethics. And we are going to apply those theories to a number of different ethical arguments. So again, if you're really sort of interested in discussing these sorts of controversial issues, then again, you might find this course is really enjoyable. Abortion, euthanasia, polyamory, so the idea that relationships can involve more than two people. Of course, our traditional sort of accepted view of relationships is that they consist of two people. But what about if 3 people or 4 people or 5 people want to be in a relationship with each other? What is the ethical status of that? Animal experimentation also is something that we look at, the use of animals in medicine. We dive into the beliefs and practices of the worldwide Buddhist community. And by worldwide Buddhist community, I mean, of course, the Buddhist community that still thrives and is vibrant in Buddhist Asia. So India, parts of India, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Vietnam, China, Japan. We have a look at how Buddhism exists there, but we also look at how Buddhism exists in the West, how Buddhism exists in the UK, how it exists in America, and how Buddhism shifted, how it moved, how it became something that was exported, how it actually arrived in the UK, and how the religion has maybe been westernized in some way. How have we got from the world of the Buddha and the teachings of the Buddha to yoga mums wandering around in namaste t-shirts, believing themselves to be in some ways yogis and, you know, powerful meditators? It's not a criticism, it's just one of the ways in which Buddhism has manifested in the West. Also look at the changing position of men and women in Buddhism. I think that often Buddhism is regarded as a religion that has no problems. And I don't quite know how that happens. You know, I feel like we're very quick, if we think in this way and we're interested in religion, we're very quick to criticize Christianity and Islam, possibly for their attitudes towards women. Well, we might see that Buddhism has its own issues as well, and that the inclusion and position of men and women is something that isn't actually as equal as we might first assume. And that's a fantastic section of the course, one of the last things that we do actually, but it's a really enjoyable part of the course. So my lessons, a variety. They won't just be me talking to you, fingers crossed, and they hopefully won't be in a virtual capacity for most part. Some lessons will be me explaining things, because of course, if it's a philosophical argument that you've never read before, that you've never come into contact with before, the best thing probably is for me to explain how it works to you. But then there'll be a lot of opportunity for you to discuss it. Anybody who I teach currently, I am sure, will tell you that the main thing that we do in my lessons is we talk. We get to know each other. We are open. We listen supportively but critically, and nothing is off the table. Nothing's off bounds. We're kind of there to pull things apart. We're there to understand things. Some lessons will hopefully be group work. That's certainly something that I'm confident at some point next year we'll be able to do more of. But even if we can't do group work in the way that we've done before, because perhaps restrictions or the way that we've got to sit, there certainly will be an opportunity for you to work in pairs and discuss your ideas and work on things collaboratively. Some lessons we will go into the ICT suite where you can use your computers, and I will use email to communicate with you as well. I do use films, I do use video clips, and of course original source material and religious scripture. We are going to have to, of course, consider where these sources of evidence or where these arguments are coming from. So above all, religious studies lessons are interactive, engaging and friendly. The really lovely thing, I think, is that the class sizes tend to be ever so slightly smaller than what you might find in psychology or sociology, not by much, but maybe just by a couple. And it really kind of helps, for everybody to be able to get to know each other. Just a word about philosophical thinking. It really is just problem solving. So if you're concerned about, well, what does she mean by like philosophy or philosophical thinking? It really is just problem solving. And really acknowledging that most of the important questions that we may have about things are not right or wrong, yes or no, black or white. Then we're not going to solve them with one word answers. We are not going to solve them by only considering one perspective. We've got to analyze the most basic beliefs. One of the things that you will notice right from the outset is that I do not like the word obviously. Nothing is obvious. When we start sentences, with obviously murder is wrong. What's obvious about that? What is obvious about that? Because I'm sure already that some of you are thinking, well, hang on a minute, there might be circumstances where it would be better to kill someone than not. That's exactly the point. This idea that we can start sentences with obviously, no. Nothing's obvious. We have quite muddled ideas about most things. I bet there are contradictory beliefs that you hold, that you think that this thing is right and this thing is wrong, but actually there isn't that much difference between this thing and this thing when you think about it. We are therefore going to be forced to realize that quite a lot of the things that we think are inconsistent, and that can feel quite challenging, that can feel quite scary, but it's fun in the end. Evaluating arguments, thinking about whether things work. If we think they do, how are we going to prove that it does work? If we think that something fails, how are we going to demonstrate and show that it fails? No, you don't need to have studied RS before. I'm just kind of going a little bit more quickly. Just thinking about the time. You absolutely don't need to have studied RS before. You just have to be enthusiastic and committed. That's the only thing. That's all I ask. Very few students study Buddhism at GCSE anyway. It seems to be becoming slightly more popular, but still in the smaller number. Most students that I see tend to have studied Christianity and Islam if they've done the GCSE at all, which is no problem. Some in Leicester do study Sikhism, but Buddhism, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So again, it's really not an imperative at all. And those of you that are doing, the GCSE in RS or who have done it over the last couple of years will know that you'll know that there's not a lot of philosophy of religion or ethics on the GCSE now. I taught the GCSE for 10 years, and when they reformed it, I was very sad because they took out all of those components that are really great in terms of providing a basis for going into the A level. But, you know, that's what it is. That's what's happened. So if you do feel as if that's what you want to pursue, you absolutely are going to be thrown into that. It is not going to be what you've experienced so far in terms of this is what Christians believe, this is why they believe it, this is what Muslims believe, this is why they believe it, here's how Christians pray, here's how Muslims pray. No, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But the A level is not like that. The A level is very, very different. In terms of what you can do to prepare, engage and investigate philosophical, ethical, and religious questions. And here are just a few suggestions. I am a bit of a fiend for watching the telly. I don't think there's anything wrong with watching the telly. I love reading and I love podcasts, but my word, do I love the telly. And the telly can teach you a lot as long as you're sort of choosing the right sorts of things, I guess. So here's just a list of some documentary series that I think are just brilliant, and they're great preparation for this course. The Story of God is a series. I think there's 3 series of it now, which you can access on Netflix, but some of it's accessible through YouTube as well. Morgan Freeman investigates questions on the problem of evil, the afterlife, the end of the world, you know, all of those kind of really big religious questions. Why We Hate is a fantastic series which is on Sky. Some of it's on YouTube, so I do appreciate that some of you might not have access to these, but I've tried to give you as many options as how to get them as possible. But it was a documentary series made by Steven Spielberg last year, exploring the roots of hate, why humans have got to this point where we can commit acts of genocide against each other. It's absolutely phenomenal. There's a full documentary series available on the Buddha on YouTube. It's a PBS documentary, so an American television network documentary, but again, it's absolutely brilliant. And Exterminate All the Brutes is a new one from the last few months, again on Sky, but probably some of it available on YouTube. I mean, strictly speaking, it's maybe not philosophy or religion. It's just important. It's about colonialism and colonialization. And again, I think exploring the roots of how we've ended up in a society where we have such inequality and such racial and ethnic division. Just a really interesting one to watch, really. YouTube obviously is a great resource. There's a couple of YouTube channels there. Philosophical texts, The Problems of Philosophy, Bertrand Russell, absolutely brilliant, accessible, 20th century philosopher, easy to read. The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. He's somebody who you're going to need to know, so have a little look. Philosophy, a guide through the subject, A.C. Grayling, again, another fantastic philosopher, professor of philosophy at Oxford University, I think, or possibly Cambridge now, writes extensively for kind of your age group, so for sort of people finding their feet into philosophy, really fantastic. And I think, you know, the main thing as well, just talk to people about things that matter, have meaningful conversations. If you see something on the news, there's obviously been lots recently around trans rights and the way in which we talk about sex and gender. That's been, you know, on the news a lot recently. Have conversations with people, find out what their views are. Abortion, euthanasia, those sorts of more challenging areas of conversation, you know, have discussions about them. I'm certainly not encouraging you to have arguments with people, but see if you can constructively challenge their thinking, right? So see if you can have conversations with people where there is a constructive disagreement, because so much of philosophy is that. Oh, it's a lot of talking. That's me done. So I'm going to stop sharing so that I can come back and I can actually see what's going on here. So could we see an example of an exam question? Is it questions like history? How far do you agree with the statement? Yeah, it's thanks Imogen for that. So it would be something along the lines of, just making this up, happiness is the only intrinsically good thing, and then it will say evaluate this VU like that. So I'm just typing into the chat box, so hopefully you can all see that. So happiness is the only intrinsically good thing. What that question means is happiness is the only thing that matters. You know, happiness is the only thing that we should be aiming for. And those of you that have looked at different ethical theories before will know or have an idea that that's what utilitarians claim, that when we are deciding how to act, the only thing we should be thinking about is making people happy. So when I gave you my example of letting the person go in front of me in the supermarket yesterday, a utilitarian would say, well, that action is only good if what you've achieved there is an increase of happiness. So maybe I made that person happy, maybe I made the person on the checkout happy, maybe I made that person's partner happier because they got out and got home more quickly, I don't know. That's the way the questions are worded, so I hope that helps. Are there any other questions that anybody has? Don't feel like you have to ask questions. Oh, there we are, let me see. Don't think, what's this? All righty, I'm gonna go. I hope to see you in September. Bye.